Hello and welcome. I'm Kamla. My guest today is Hannah Kain. She's the CEO and president of ALOM, a manufacturing company located in Fremont. In case you didn't know, Fremont has been a manufacturing hub since the 1960s, and Fremont was the place that Apple decided to open its first manufacturing plant in America. It was in Fremont, and it turns out that there is a connection between Apple and Hannah's company. Welcome to the show. So you truly were thinking differently.
Yes, so we happen to be located in Apple's old factory. So this was the first factory that Apple opened, as you mentioned, and we moved in there in 2005. At that point of time, the company was 8 years old, and we just loved moving into this perfect building.
How did you discover the Apple building? Did you go looking for it, or you just wanted to move to Fremont?
We were actually in Fremont, and we needed to move and expand. And we found the building, and then I discovered that Apple had been there. And of course, I loved the idea of being in a historic building.
Has some of that luck and charm from Apple rubbed off to your company?
Well, we very frequently have customers who used to work with Apple or currently working with Apple who are commenting on their history with that building. So it's, I guess there's a little bit rubbing off, and certainly I feel very lucky and privileged, both being in the building and running ALOM and being in Silicon Valley at this exciting time.
ALOM, what does ALOM stand for?
It stands for Advanced Logistics Operations and Manufacturing. And what we do is really supply chain management for technology-rich companies. So we work with companies that have technology in their products, and we also work with companies that have a heavy aspect of technology in their supply chain. So we are kind of the technology-savvy company in the equation.
Is it anything like ERP?
No, we are not. Yes, we are using an ERP, but we are manufacturing and distributing technology products. So, for instance, if you think about the evolution of products, it started out that technology companies were all the traditional Silicon Valley companies. You already mentioned Apple. And we can talk about other Sun Microsystems now, Oracle and Cypress Semiconductor, etc. But technology has migrated way beyond that into the automotive industry, into medical, into a number of other industries, and it's going to go into virtually all products now. So one example of a company that we are supporting would be Ford Motor Company.
Oh.
So we help get the navigational software into the vehicles for the infotainment system.
Oh, the USB thing?
Yeah, the USB and the SD cards. So that is a part of what we are doing in Fremont.
Oh, so anytime Ford has an upgrade on their Ford Sync, which I think now they've changed.
Yeah, that's right.
So that USB stick is something that you produce and ship it to the customers.
That is correct. And we also help them with the initial load of the information on SD cards and upgrades via SD cards. So those are some of the things we are doing in Fremont. And we right now work and ship out of 17 locations globally.
17 locations.
17 locations globally. So one big change from when ALOM was started in '97 till today is certainly the globalization, the entire globalization of the supply chain, both in terms of where you get the raw materials and the components. So we source that for all our customers, but also in terms of where the markets are and the need for all manufacturers and virtually all companies to think globally. And so we are supporting our customers in that effort. About 90% of our business comes from Fortune 50 companies.
So is Apple one of your customers?
That we cannot talk about. Right?
It has to be.
many of our customers prefer that we don't talk about our relationship, so we need to sign non-disclosure agreements with them. And that's why I'm talking about Ford Motor Company as one of our customers, because they actually allow us to talk about the relationship.
So if you're working with Fortune 50, and there are quite a few of them here in the Valley, so you're probably working with them. So you are actually in charge. If I was to simplify it, it's what I as an end customer get from a company, say Ford or Apple. I don't know if Apple is your customer, but I'm just using the thing. And whatever other companies that are, they have something for the customer to communicate?
Exactly. So if you think about you are in on a shopping cart and you click the submit button, the order may go to us.
Gotcha.
And we may actually be the ones who have designed and managing the website. You think you're doing business with a certain company because it's got their logo on there, but you're really doing business with us. And we will ship the order out to you. In the meantime, we also manufacture that product, and we have warehouses with that product globally. And so that would be a very typical project we would be working on for our customers.
How did you choose the name of the company?
Oh, I guess it was, you know, just like Apple was chosen back when somebody came up with it, and then we had to say, well, if nobody comes up with anything better the next week, that's the name we are choosing. So ALOM stands for Advanced Logistics Operations and Manufacturing.
So you wanted no confusion. If you went to your clients, by spelling out the name, they would know what it is that you're offering.
Well, we usually just use the acronym.
No, in the early days.
In the early days, we still used the acronym. So, but it was very clear what we were offering to them, which is essentially a full service solution, so a one-stop shop.
Are you public?
No, we are not. I happen to own the stock in the company, and my husband owns 49%, and I own 51%. So it's a woman-owned company, and
which is rare in the manufacturing.
Oh, it's absolutely rare. It's hard to start a company up in manufacturing and keep it personally owned, because you are dependent on equipment and buildings and building inventory, etc. So it's very cash demanding to get it going. And certainly, as you go through growth spurts, it's very cash demanding. So usually manufacturing companies are either very old or they are certainly public companies.
So why did you choose to go the private route and not take money from any investors? What was the reason?
Well, my friends would say I'm a control freak. But
are you?
I like to have control in the sense of being able to react fast, which is one of our big competitive advantages. And we all decide in life which battles we like to fight and which victories we are going for. And certainly, once you grow a company to a certain size, when you own the stock, that's a good situation to be in. But it also makes for a much faster decision process, and it has allowed me to focus on actually running the company as opposed to interfacing with the board all the time. And so one of the things I've been really conscious about as I've grown the company is to get advice from others, because when you don't have a board that's really doing some of the governance, you need to get a lot of advice from others.
So you are the driver of this car, but you need to have navigators. And you said you need to, who are your navigators that you turn to?
So I turn to a lot of peers to certainly support me from a standpoint of being outside the company. And I turn to many customers. I also have close relationship with suppliers who are seeing what's going on. And then my philosophy has always been to hire the very best staff. I think many small companies fail because the owners don't hire A players. And they get B or C players in, and it turns out they can't really do the job. And then the owner decides, oh, I better do it myself, and, you know, they can't scale. So my philosophy has been to hire A players and get them in, and get very good advice from them and very good support, and really help the company grow.
So you get support and help from within your workers, people that work with you. How good or bad are you at delegating? Because you mentioned that your friend said that you are a control freak. Another way of looking at it is you like to have all the information and then make a decision. That's another way of looking at it.
Not necessarily all the information, and my staff are very good at making decisions. And so
how do you empower them?
I ask them to go and do a thing, right? Or we talk about the direction we want to go in, and they work within that framework. So I think that's really important for companies, for small companies, as you're looking at delegating and you're looking at growing to the size we are at now, which is essentially mid-size, is to empower the people to work within a framework. So a key item, a key area is to give them enough information and enough authority. So we have been voted one of the best workplaces in the Bay Area for several years in a row now. And a part of that, one of our highest score is how much everybody in the company knows and understands the direction we're going in. And so keeping everybody informed so that we know what's going on in other areas within the company, outside the company, what's the direction we're going in, what is it we're trying to achieve this year,
So you keep it
next
transparent?
Year. We keep it very transparent. We share 3-year plans with everybody.
How do you share it? Do you share it at a company annual meeting? Or?
We have company meetings, all hands meetings, and I also each year publish a 1-page business plan that everybody who is on staff gets.
How did you come up with the idea of this 1-page business plan?
Oh, I stole it from somebody, and I don't remember who. So that's again an advantage of hanging out with peers.
That's an excellent way of actually sharing, your vision of what the company is going to grow.
Yeah, and it's not just my vision. It's certainly shared and with a lot of input and discussion before we finalize it. And it's got our basic core values. It's got our quality goals. It's got our mission, and then of course the current plans.
Anytime you're in a business, things can go right, things can go wrong. So I'm assuming there must have been an instance where something went wrong with one of your customers. How did you deal with it? And after having dealt with it, what kind of a decision did you come up as a company that in the future, if we had such an event, this is how we are going to handle it?
Well, I don't think anybody gets to be in business for a long time without having troublesome situations showing up. And that could be with customers, or it could be a number of other situations. And my philosophy has always been, I believe in people. And because there's somebody,
But do you go and own up, though? But do you go and own up? If I was your customer and there was a mistake, would you own up to me?
Oh, of course,
okay.
Of course. Everybody needs to own up, right? And we share. I mean, we have extremely high quality levels. Essentially, we run about between 10 and 100 times better quality levels than our competitors. But still, we deal with millions of different units, data streams, etc. every day, right? So occasionally something happens. And so, yeah, of course, we own up to that. And we have a continuous improvement process. So we learn from it. But let's say we have a customer that's closing down, going out of business, they cannot pay. It doesn't mean that we don't want new customers, right? It's you have customer situations all the time, and of course you learn from them. But I feel many people overreact. My overall philosophy is I believe in other people. I believe in that people are trying to treat each other fairly. And I don't deviate from that thinking. So without being overly naive, because somebody made a misstep doesn't mean that I think everybody is going to make that misstep.
Right.
But in the end, in order to avoid errors internally, of course, what we do is a lot of process-driven improvement. So we have a large amount of quality certifications, ISO 9000, ISO 13485 for medical devices. We are TL 9000 certified for the telecommunication industry. We are TS compliant with
all the standards.
All the standards, right? And it makes everybody very quality conscious. And it's actually one of the things that happens when you start at ALOM is all new staff members get to interface with me, and I emphasize our quality standards, and I go over the one-page business plan.
How big is your company?
Oh, we don't publish financials, but
no.
we are a mid-sized player. So here in the Bay Area, we employ just under 100 people. Globally, directly and indirectly, it's probably more than like a couple of thousand people.
And is Fremont the only office, or do you have other offices? You said you have 18 global locations.
Yeah, 17. Yeah.
17. So are those remote locations, or are those real offices that you have with people from ALOM?
Yeah, it's of course it's plants. We are able to produce and ship out of there. So.
Okay. How did the idea for ALOM start? You studied political science, then you went on to do a Master's of Business Management. So I'm wondering, how did you, think of manufacturing? It's so remote from political science and international relations.
Well, I've always been fascinated with physical products, and I've always been fascinated by technology. And in supply chain management, those two activities really flow together fantastically.
Is it because I did some research and I found out that the town you grew up in was Odense?
Yeah.
And it apparently has a thriving shipbuilding industry, and they built containers for Maersk.
That is correct.
So I'm wondering if you as a child got to see this activity in the shipbuilding yard, and whether that kind of in an indirect way influenced you. You know how as kids, if you grew up in a town that's famous for something, I'm just wondering, and you also said your father was a business person.
Yeah, my dad was a college professor who dabbled in business on the side, and I got involved in his businesses very early on and started doing the bookkeeping at a very young age. I think I was 11 when I started helping him. And
so you were 11 when you started bookkeeping?
Yeah, that's correct.
So very detail-oriented. You couldn't make mistakes.
That is correct. I think I've moved on from the detail-oriented now, but yeah, I learned from the bottom up.
And what did you learn from your father? Because he was in the, in the teaching profession, but also a business person. And sometimes those two don't go hand in hand, because as a teacher, you tend to be more idealistic, I'm assuming, and then in the business world, you have to be a little bit more practical and a little bit more grounded, and, things are a little different in the business world.
I learned many things from my dad, but he was a very compassionate person. So I learned about compassion in business, and that is really sticking with me. Now, my dad was in concentration camp. He was actually declared dead 11 years before I was born, and was tortured in camp and barely made it out alive, and came back to Denmark.
He was from Denmark?
He was from Germany originally, and had moved just before the war started, and was captured for concentration camp while he was in Denmark. And of course, he got a really bad start in life. And I always said to myself, well, I'm getting this fabulous start in life. Let me exploit it. Let me do what I really dream about. And if I'm sitting at the end of my life and I think, oh, if I had just done this or that, that's on me, right? I've got a lot of opportunity, and that was really what drove me to immigrate to the U.S. was that opportunity, that feeling, I need to make the best of my life.
What did your mother do?
My mother was a school teacher, also a very compassionate person, working in an area with low-income students, and really helping many of them, and that was very wonderful to see. And And even to this day, when I go back to Denmark and I go out with her, some of her old students will come up and thank her, and that's just a wonderful feeling.
So from both your parents, you learned this compassionate trait. But what did you learn from your mother? Besides the being compassionate?
Oh, my mother always said the same thing to me when I was little, and that was, don't get yourself into any trouble you can't get yourself out of. She just knew I would get into trouble, but at least I had to wriggle myself out of it.
How did you wriggle yourself out?
Oh, you know, I would negotiate, I would you know, ask for help, whatever it took. And so my mom was actually an excellent delegator as I was growing up. She let me do a lot of different things, and I pushed some borders pretty heavily when I was a kid, as you probably can imagine. So she was very good with giving me the freedom and just letting me do my thing, and she was not overly worried.
So you said you wanted to take control of your life in a way, and this was the country that provided that opportunity. How is this country different from Denmark? What is it that America offers? What is it that Silicon Valley offers that makes one realize and recognize their potential and also, you know, become successful?
Well, I think when I immigrated from Denmark, which was in 1990, the taxes were extremely high. It was not very entrepreneurial. There was essentially nobody starting up new businesses. That has changed, fortunately, but at the time it was not very exciting if you wanted to run your own business. And I feel the US and especially California and Silicon Valley certainly have much more of the entrepreneurial spirit. So while the tax pressure is unfortunately getting up there even here, we have much more of the entrepreneurial spirit, support systems, both among peers, among different associations, and even to some extent the public, right? The state and the federal government.
Were you afraid when you started the company and filed papers? I don't know if it was an LLC, S corporation, C corporation, but when you filed that paperwork, what went through you? Do you remember what it was like?
Oh, I was scared, out of my wits. Yeah, absolutely. And I think anybody starting out with the ambition of growing a larger company should be very thoughtful about that.
Thoughtful
right?
about what?
Oh, what can go wrong, the risk management, the impact on your personal life. And so I had been what I always called gainfully employed until I started my own company. And it's very different when you start your own company because it becomes way more fluid with the impact on your personal financial situation and your personal time management versus what's going on at the company. And so when you are an employee, you have your time at the company, and all of a sudden it's, okay, if I take vacation, I'm really hurting here, or if my customer is not paying, maybe I can't afford something personally, and so it really becomes very integrated. And it was one of the areas that maybe I hadn't really thought through enough.
The time management.
Yeah. Well, both the time and the financial impact. And after a while, one of my staff members sat me down and said, you know, I used to work with you in a previous life, and you have changed so much. And I went home and thought about it, and I came to work next day really determined that I was going to treat ALOM as if it was somebody else's company.
And have you done that?
Yes.
Okay. This question comes from a viewer. Gender ratio. How do you change that? How have you changed that in your company?
So we have 55% women.
Oh,
and,
okay.
And part of that is certainly from...
Is your CFO a woman?
No.
Is your chief operating officer a woman?
No.
Okay.
But I've got a lot of both racial
okay.
and other diversity in the company. And we're actually often being showcased as one of the most diverse companies that you can showcase. And part of it is looking at what people can contribute and what are their core values, as opposed to their skin or their gender or their sexual preferences or whatever else. You know, what is it you can contribute? What can you do this job, and can you do it excellently?
Okay.
And what are you bringing to the table? And I'm a strong believer in diversity makes stronger. So I think everybody in the company feels the same, and that really makes us work very well together as a team, leveraging the differences instead of making the differences limit us. But in general, I think women just need to get into manufacturing and supply chain, right? I mean, if you look at supply chain within the next 10 years, there's going to be a shortage of 2 million people in supply chain.
Even with robots coming and 3D printing?
2 million people. And in supply chain are actually some of the professions where women are making higher salaries than men.
Oh.
Yes, right? So everybody ought to tell their daughters to go into supply chain.
But what kind of skills do they need to be in supply chain?
Okay, so for instance, in purchasing, you need to be able to deal with people. You need to be able to deal with many things at the same time. You need to be able to negotiate well, right? You need to be able to forge relationships such that the day when you're in a crunch, you can get things. You need to do a lot of those things that really come very naturally to many women. So, and in manufacturing, I mean, you know, when you think manufacturing, many people think about dirty floors and, grimy restrooms, and I don't know what goes through people's minds. And, manufacturing is one of the cleanest, nicest area, right? And you need to really work with people, and that's what we are all doing. So, I'm a big proponent for getting more women into manufacturing and supply chain.
Hannah, it's a pleasure to talk to you. We've run out of time. I had so many questions. I wanted to ask you, what was your unrealized ambition, if you have one? But I think we'll have to have it for another day. But thank you for sharing that there is going to be a shortage of workers in manufacturing, and that manufacturing floor is not dirty and the bathrooms are not dirty. It's clean tech.
Thank you.
Right? Thank you so much. And thank you for watching. If you missed any of our shows, you can watch them on our YouTube channel. And I'll be back again next week with another show. Until then, goodbye.